Okay, so Jeff here again. This is another in the quality, measuring quality series here. The kind of the pre-read you want to do this. The required reading, watching rather than reading. Before you come to this one, is my video called "What is a Language" or "What is Language." I can't remember if it's "What is Language" or "What is a Language." It's kind of the same thing. I made this a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago, and it's up on YouTube. And that's required reading before you come to this thing. You must read it. Do not continue with this video until you've watched that one first, because I'm going to refer back to things that were really important in that video. Um, you've got to understand the difference. You must understand. Do not continue this video unless you watch the what is language or what is language, okay? Which will be in the playlist. And I'm going to, because it's really important to get this, or else you're going to get confused later on because you're just not going to understand why. Okay, you didn't understand that. And if you don't, especially if you're not a linguist, if you're not a linguist, and I'm talking about a theoretical linguist. Okay, I'm talking about someone that works in dialectology and phonetics. Okay, you've got to understand this to be able to understand why it's important. Um, and if you haven't been trained on this, then that video is your training. Okay, it's your training to understand this. So this video is now going to take this next step beyond that what is language video. So this one's going to talk about this video is going to talk about I'm going to call this applying the semantic prototype semantics to different fields of linguistics. I actually came up with this the other day, talking with a colleague, and so this is something I've done for years. I just didn't realize I was actually doing it, but I finally, in talking to that colleague, hey, I'm actually doing this. So this all goes back to the kind of the reading that you want to do or get things, and I might actually I'll explain the book here while I'm doing this. It's not my book. It's a book called Prototypical Semantics, but it's actually in French. The French version of this is George Kleber. Kleiber, Kleber, George with an S at the end of it. I don't remember the year. I don't remember the publication, and I read this back 30 years ago while I was in. Actually, I have the book up in my attic somewhere. Okay, when I read it for my graduate studies in the University of Lyon. And so what we're going to be able to do is we're going to go ahead and the book was about basically the whole concept of prototype semantics is if you got I actually took a test on this thing, a very specific test on it. I applied this book to 5 different subdomains. I wish I had that piece of paper I applied that thing to. It was so cool. I applied this to 5 domains. I'm going to actually do this and re-explain this whole thing for one of my final exams of that book, or that class in lexicology. But what the book talked about was prototype semantics. The prototype semantics is basically you've got a bird. What's your idea of a bird? Okay, what's your idea of a bird? The prototype bird. Some people stereotype, but call it prototype. What's a bird to you? What do you as a person think of as a bird, right? And what's your perfect bird? Perfect bird. And then think about your family. Do they all think about the same perfect bird? And what do you think about your town? Do they all have the same concept of the perfect bird? Or what is the perfect bird? What is the bird? Okay, what is that? And then does that spread out to your region and all that? And there are times where there is a perfect the reference. They call it the reference. Okay, the reference. Well, I don't want to say perfect because I'm trying to avoid the perfect, right? But the reference bird. What kind of bird is it? Now, actually, for me in American English, I have one reference. And then in France, I have another reference. And based on the culture, based on the 2 different cultures where I grew up. Well, I grew up in America, and then I've lived in France for 30 years. So I've grown around what other people reference as the bird, okay? And how my children see that, and how their mother sees that, and how the family members see this, right? And I've applied this to a lot of different fields too. This is not just the birds, but I want to use because it's really important this is the bird is a simple thing. You can actually apply this to chairs too, right? We're going to give a couple examples of this. So what is the reference bird? Now, is the bird a robin with a red breast, or is it a little sparrow? Okay. In France, it's the moineau. It's a sparrow. Uh, and actually for me in America, it was the robin, the red-breasted robin. Those sparrows are common, but the red-breasted robins, it's kind of more the reference. Um, Now, what are the traits of the bird? And you got to think, what are, I want to kind of get into traits here because really it's all about semantics. And those are logical semantics, logic and lexical semantics come play. What is the category? What is this thing? And then the different subcategories of that thing. And there are values, plus and minus. So a bird has wings, right? So has wings, plus and minus. It has wings, plus, plus, plus. But sometimes you might have birds that don't have wings, right? So they may, so you begin to place these different types of birds on this graph around knowledge graph, right? We're doing knowledge graph stuff, right? And based on all these different criteria, and all these different criteria are something we do in phonology, right? We're doing phonology. We actually have criteria called phonological traits, right? So, um, and then you can have, is this plus voiced, minus voice? Is it plus obstruent or not? Is it stop, not? Is it sibilant, not? That kind of stuff. So this is what we do in phonetics and phonology, right? So the bird, listen, we're going to apply this to other ARs, right? So the bird thing is, does the bird have wings or not? Does it lay eggs or not? Okay. Does it fly? Because the bird can have wings, but maybe not fly, right? Or can have not quite wings that can't fly, right? And so I'm kind of give the example. So then, and the size of the bird and length of the legs and all that kind of stuff and all these things. Does it have a beak? Does the bird have a beak? Or not? Um, so all these things are really important as you begin to take different examples of birds or different animals or mammals, whatever animals, the animal kingdom, and put them on the graph and they say, is the bird or not? And the whole goal is to see how close it is to the reference or not in the graph. Now, the interesting thing is that you can have this reference bird in the middle that's got all your traits. They're all plus, right? It's all plus, 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 all the traits. And then you have these other birds like, okay, so we had the sparrow. What about an ostrich? Okay, well, it can run, but it can't fly, right? So is that a bird or not? See, this is the thing. It can run, but it can't fly because the wings have been, it's in the context it lives in, it can't fly, right? It wasn't able to fly anymore. And then you come to other things that, like a bat has wings, right? But is it a bird? Wow, this is interesting because we begin to position these animals. How close are they to approximate the reference or not, based on the traits that are all plus or minus? And you can position this thing, and you come down to a kind of this grid, this kind of map. It's a grid, but it's a map of all these animals that are closer and depending on the distance they are to this. And then we finally get to a far enough thing to an animal that's far enough. Like, so I said a bat. Bat is kind of at the edge. It's actually on the other side. It's not a bird, but it's close to a bird because it has some traits that are bird-like, right? So that was the reference example in the book that George Kleiber wrote about in prototype semantics. Another example that comes up a lot in linguistics classes is a chair. Now, what is a chair? So, yeah, I got some chairs here, right? So I'm going to pull up a chair here because, this is right here. I'm going to pull this. See this chair here? So I got a chair here. So we got 4 legs here. Yeah, so it's got 4 legs, right? 4 legs. Okay, metal legs. It's got a back on it, but it doesn't have side things on it, right? So a chair. What's your reference of a chair? And my reference of a chair is a 4-legged sitting thing. This thing I sit on, 4 legs that has a back. Now, so it has plus legs and it has 4. So 4 legs is a value, plus 4. Okay, back is a plus or value. It's a sitting thing, plus. Okay. Because I'm not laying down, right? If I lay down, that's called something else, called a bed, right? So, you see what I mean? But wait a second. What if it's got armrests? That would be another value. Does it have to have armrests or not? So there's a key thing. And at work, I was showing to some the other day. I had a chair that had five. It was not a. It was not a. It was a. It was actually a chair that goes up and down, right? It's got five legs, but it has one leg that goes out five places with the wheels on it because you can move it. So does a chair have to be able to move or not with wheels? So plus wheels, not wheels. You see what I mean? And but I had one. It had a post with five legs. So is it five legs or four legs? Let's get down to, so you see the plus the trait thing is really kind of important to have here because you begin to say what's the reference and how close do you get to this reference from how distant you are. Now, what is it if it doesn't have a back? It's got another word called stool, right? Well, is it stool a chair or not? Well, it's kind of like, yeah, kind of a chair, kind of chair, but not a chair. Right? So that's the difference where the difference is it a chair anymore or is it a stool? And how close it is and what are the number of traits there can determine is that thing you call a bird or a chair or is it something else called a stool? And so stool, does it always have to have four legs? Wait, can it have three legs? Well, yeah. In fact, if you think about it, there are some camping gear that's got one leg. That's like, it's like SOS stool, right? And you do a ticket. When you got to go somewhere and you got to lean up against something, you want to sit down, you have this one-legged stool, right? That's a portable one-legged stool. And you have so these kinds of things are possible. It's possible. It does exist. But do we call it a stool anymore? Or do we call it like a tripod stool, right? Because it's like a tripod, right? I mean, you can see the thing. So this all comes into play. All this comes into play. Of determining, and this is all prototype semantics. This is where it's used a lot. Prototype semantics is used a lot, and the whole lexical semantics, these things are used too. But I want to take down. You can take the same concept and take it over to different domains of linguistics. You can take it over to phonetics and phonology. So phonetics, I've always struggled how to explain the difference between phonetics and phonology. And I came out, you know what? This is really easy now. Phonetics is sounds, pure sounds, right? And phonology is just the prototype semantics approach to phonetics. Yeah, some people say with surface level and deep level. It's the prototype semantics approach to it because now we're taking all the sounds. Now we do when you put them in compounded things and you put them into context. How close are they to the reference pure sound anymore or not, right? And then you add all these phonological rules on top of it, and it makes it closer or far away from where the sound is not. It's got a flap, it's got a tap, it's got aspiration, all that kind of stuff. And is it that sound anymore, or is it another sound that's a minimal pair, right? So all this is applying for prototype semantics. If I want to explain this kind of simply with the reference thing, the whole idea of reference or perfect sound, is it the perfect sound, the pure phonetic, International Phonetic Alphabet sound or not? Or not? Or what is it? Phonology, and that's context in the language applies to this. So now let's take it to another thing, morphology and syntax. Words in sentences. Well, words have clusters of things, right? Time, aspect, mode, the TMA, basically tense, mode, and aspect to that. How do all the conjugations and your declensions all impact this? All the endings of these affixes, prefixes or suffixes or affixes, they're called. They're all attached to the word, and how when you add these to the things, it becomes a longer word or not, or is it a word anymore, or is it chunked word or a lot? So all these things begin playing here. And really, morphology is just you're beginning to, how does morphology then fit into grammar, syntax, which is along the sentence level, and how do these words play parts in the syntax of the syntax? I'm using linguistic terms here, right? And so what happens is, what's the difference between morphology and syntax versus literacy? Okay, literacy is actually learning to read and write, right? To learning to read and write. And sometimes you call this, there's a difference between literacy. There are two different types of literacy. There's literacy of children in school. They go to school and the the language of the education system of the country, and I'm not going to say whether that's a spoken language for the children or not. That's a whole other situation, but I'll add to it. And then when you learn literacy, as from going from an oral language to that and not knowing how to read, right? So you got the whole literacy of adults, and you have that whole kind of context there. And you can have, if it's not your language that you're learning, or if it's language that you do speak as a mother tongue, or if you're learning it as you're learning the literacy in school of a language that you don't speak, right? So this is, and I'm talking about in countries where there's a national, dialects, and they have to learn the language of the school system, right? Education system. So that gets in all kinds of things. But if you look at it, literacy and orthographies and spelling systems are the prototype semantics of what we call morphology. Because what you're doing is you're applying now these combinations of words and things, and you're teaching people how to read and write with letters that are combinations of sounds that now are modified, and they actually change so that you say dogs and cats, and they're different, right? And that have different endings. And different pronunciations, different. So the word, beaches and dogs and cats, they all have S, but they pronounce differently, and some have an E and some don't have an E, right? So all these things play into how you write, right? Because hearing and writing and listening and writing and speaking and writing is different, right? So this is, again, literacy and learning to read and write is a prototype semantics aspects of how you combine things. So you have letters that actually correspond to a lot of different variations of actually what could be written. What could be written is actually pronounced and then written. This kind of gets kind of fun, right? So came up with this idea the other day. The prototype semantics approach to things, right? So they can apply this to different fields of linguistics too. And we could talk about how sociolinguistics and sociolex, how that applies with the different kind of applications of prototype linguistics to what is the reference of a accent, right? What's the reference accent of a country? And do they have an accent or not? Well, it kind of depends, because everybody's got their own individual idiolects. Then they have regional, patois of the town, and then it becomes dialects and all that. But what's the reference accent, right? Kind of depends, because, right, dialect is just, language is a dialect with an army or power, right? So all this sociolinguistics and sociolex are actually taking into consideration the prototype semantics approach of dealing with accents, and whose accent is the reference. Okay, so we can see begins to kind of build up, and we can apply this to all different fits. It's really cool to kind of take this and apply it to all the different ways. And then we can take that to pragmatics and to discourse analysis and all that stuff. And then we can talk about, how do we deal with, how do you deal with anaphor and cataphor and all the dealing with clitics and dealing with kind of, dealing with pronouns and where they're placed and how far they go, the reference farther back and all that stuff. I mean, we could take this on and apply this to all the different areas of linguistics, right? But I can't do that here. I don't have time to do the whole thing here, right? But I'm trying to kind of get you to think about this. But in the end, what is the prototype? What is the reference? And that becomes the point of departure. And is there a reference, or are there different references? And do people in different languages have different references, right? And this is the hard thing with the linguistics, is it kind of depends, right? And so, like in phonology, we know that everything, it all depends. Phonetics, it all depends, right? And so, but you have to establish references to the writing system, so you consolidate and make and aggregate things into a single form rather than learn 25 million forms of all these things, right? There are some languages you have like 10,000 conjugations possible, or even 100,000 different conjugations. Actually, in Swahili, I was just learning all the possible forms that you can do, but you won't find all of them, right? Because it's been reduced because of certain context, of certain combinations that you wouldn't do in that thing. But it's possible forms, they're all there. So this is where it's really cool to understand this kind of concept of what is the reference. And when you're going to be able to apply this to language technologies, we got to deal with this, because you got to deal with the phonology, you got to deal with the semantic aspects of it. You got to deal with this, and how you're going to actually convert this from one language to another, and actually understand people's different accents, and how you're going to pronounce, how you can deal with non-native accents and native accents in different ways. How you can deal with people are tired or not, or if they're sick or not. And they're going to be, no, I got to sick. The whole joke about the whole joke about the astronaut. The whole thing of the medication. They get a medication commercial, and then you got the astronaut. He's going to go. He's going to take off in the rocket, right? And he's going up and he's got facial recognition and voice recognition. He doesn't understand who he is because he's got a cold, right? And so he's going, and so he can't understand. So the commercial is about actually taking medication to make him sound like he doesn't have a cold anymore, right? So they're using that whole language technology thing of face recognition, facial recognition to actually show that the medication support. That's a selling purpose. Now, what do you do with facial recognition? The whole thing of get prototype semantics. What do you do if you got to wear a mask, right? How are you going to deal with it, right? So, again, there are a lot. All the images are part of languages too. So, so what I want to do is I wanted you to kind of get an understanding that as you begin to, you need to take a prototype semantics approach to when you're doing things to say, what's a bird? What's a chair? Because in the end, everybody has a different reference to it, or can have different references. And that's the most important thing to understand here in linguistics, is that there is no single answer. And the whole idea is getting a consensus of people to have the same concept, the same reference when they're talking, right? And that's where conflict comes apart, when people don't have the same references. So that's the challenge of linguistics. And the challenge of linguistics is now, how do you apply this to language technology to do this for you, right? That's the cool and fun part of this. So that's why I'm doing this video series, because I'm just challenging us to really think this. How do we do it? Because in our brains, we can fill holes, right? We can fill lots of holes. In fact, there are lots of things about the whole thing about the Cambridge thing, the Cambridge test. And so you got this whole sequence of letters. They've mixed up all the letters. And the only thing you have to do is make sure that the first letter and the last letter of every word in the entire paragraph is the beginning and end of the word. And you can mix up all the letters in between, and somebody can read the message. You can do this in French, you can do this in English, and you can do it in different languages. But our brains are able to fill all this up and actually reassemble the letters. Scrabble, right? That's why people can play Scrabble, because you can see all the letters and have all these letters and a kind of thing. And you can actually, in your mind, reposition and create these words, right? On the Scrabble things of those 7 letters you got. And you can recreate all this and watch the board, and you can do this. That's why people can do Scrabble, because the mind can actually fill holes of letters, right? And rearrange them. And then you push, and then you rearrange, you look at the board, and you imagine all the things. The mind does this. The mind is a hole filler, right? And that's why we can play Scrabble. So that's the whole thing of that's why you can do that Cambridge text thing. That's why the mind is actually do speed reading as well, right? Because we can actually fill holes while we're reading and fill this up. But the problem with a computer is it can't fill the holes, right? Can't fill the holes. It can only do what's been programmed to do, right? It's really hard to train a computer by AI to actually fill the holes of things that don't exist there, right? That's where our mind is like beyond the computer, right? That's why I kind of joke about it'll never get to our level, right? Because a computer doesn't live. Doesn't have social experience. It's not lived. It's not lived in different experiences and things, and know that I've got different things here that I'm a restaurant. I know that my mustard and my ketchup are red and yellow, and so I know that that's colors, and these are things that I do. Or I've got a wine glass and a water glass, and they're not going to be the same sizes. A wine glass is going to be smaller than the water glass is bigger, right? These are things I know. Or I'm eating in a restaurant or eating at home, and you always put the forks. Always put the larger ones on the outside, and you go down the smaller, right? It kind of depends. Or you put on the left side or the right side. Where do you put it? This is social knowledge. Computers don't know social knowledge. So this is why humans are better. But it's really important because this all adds to what is context and what is translation and what is stuff. Because all this, we as human beings know this stuff, and we transfer this into how we communicate. We communicate in things that we do by using social knowledge added to sounds and meaning to create more meaning and added meaning on top of the meaning. That's not just purely sounds, right? And just affixes and all that. So, and not just pure words. It's more than words, right? It's 75% we do is actually visual and contextual. Most of what you're doing here is listening to my voice, watch my hand gestures. I do a lot of hand gestures because I'm adding language here, right? Different types of language. 75% and more than the voice right here, right? And not just the pure voice and words. You're hearing my intonation of my voice and my speed and all that. All this plays in the game, right? Plays around into this. So this is really important to be able to establish how you measure quality, because I'm going to come into a few examples where I'm going to play with, I'm going to imitate things that, and I'm going to make you think that they're mistakes, but they're not. I'm going to show you because of these other variables that I've actually played with, right? So this is going to be fun. I'm going to gamify this thing. I'm gamifying the whole thing of linguistics and language and lingo. So we're going to do that. So yeah, let's get on to these next videos. This is so fun.